Hi, Manu. To anyone else tuning in, perhaps via YouTube, this is part of an already existing discussion that's kind of elaborate about this point, so beware of rabbit holes if you haven't checked that out. Well, then, Manu, I want to jump right into addressing your analogy. And it is, well, I guess I got to apologize in advance for having ridden this particular merry-go-round before. Sounds patronizing, and I don't mean to do that, but there's a lot of experience of examining that analogy, a lot of debate during that examination, so I may sound a little didactic. Uh, Hope to do my best about that. So we have this idea proposed by you in this case of sheet music, particularly concert performance, the concert playing of music, and its focus on a conductor and its focus on direction, its focus on a somewhat predetermined outcome, as opposed to jazz musicians, particularly jamming, or any musicians, I guess, in a state of what we call jamming. I have all kinds of ways in my head through experience that this conversation can go wrong. I've really tried to pinpoint where I think the analogy is not going to help us. And tempting as it is, because it's really tempting, that it should be abandoned. It's not the right analogy for what we're talking about. All right. The key one variable, despite many tempting ones, the key variable is the notion of performance. That we are talking about an activity in the case of the concert where performance to an audience is what we're doing today. This is the plan. All of us, the collective work, because we're always talking here about collective and interactive and listening to one another work. Terrible word, right? Work. Let's just say effort. So we have this collective shared listening activity, and then we have an audience that we're doing a thing for. And that's the variable that I want to throw out and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, hold on, hold on. I'm interested in what the group is doing among one another. I'm interested in the medium that we create only through that particular interaction, and then what happens with that medium. So, with that in mind, we got to throw out that analogy entirely, not due to any other variables, but due to that variable alone. And it saves us really difficult other variables that are endlessly fascinating, but I think ultimately not very helpful. I'll mention them just so you know I didn't, dismiss things or not fail to think of certain things. One of those, and remember, I don't want to stick with this stuff. One of those is the idea of the prepared music versus the improvised music. And again, that's desperately tempting to say, that's a core variable here. It's not. When musicians do what people call jamming, it is not getting together and having the catwalk on the keyboards and then just sort of like being there and doing that in one another's presence. Typically, they begin with a thing, and they know that the thing is available to be shaped, but it is a jumping off point. It is a premise. It is a movement available for going places. So you could, in fact, be a piece of sheet music, which baffles non-musician theoreticians all the time. They're like, they're jamming, but they have sheet music. Oh, wow. It's not a big deal. Person shows up, they've got a ton of, everybody's got all these little sheets, right? And they pass one around and say, okay, let's start here, and they start jamming. Or it could be any number of other things, even without a sheet. It could be somebody, trying out a riff or a beat or something like that. Or it could be very structured. Let's play this song, and it is a song that they all know. It's a standard, and they play through it a couple of times, and then they start messing with it. So the notion of the jam as noise for its own sake, and this kind of deconstructed, well, it's music because they're doing it together regardless of what it sounds like and all that kind of stuff, we can get rid of that crap. We don't have to worry about that. The same thing goes for many other analogies that people try to draw, that have kind of a false idea of the naive kind of honking into it musician, or the naive kind of scribbling it out on the page writer, and stuff like that. It's a lovely romantic vision, but we can throw that out. And I spent way too much time on that, didn't I? All right. With this in mind, the notion that the thing we're throwing out is the performance context, that gets rid of something else that we can briefly, I hope, recognize as eliminated, which is this idea of the story only being worthy of that term, in fact, even defined by its professionalized product status, its commercial identity. This is so baked into our culture that it's incredibly difficult to get around it. Colloquial meanings of story are various. There are several. One, interestingly enough, simply means barefaced lie. But the one I want to focus on is the notion of the story as a crafted object. And that, well, here, I'll put it this way. If you say, let's say a person, says, I write stories, what's the first thing they get asked? Have you sold any? Perhaps, how much do you make doing that? The term story has no weight in conversation. If you're talking about it as a thing you make, it has no weight in conversation except as a salable object. And it is only a story once it is in that state, which is to say, done. Nobody cares about stories as in the transition of creation. We don't call those stories. And we certainly don't care about them except insofar as they have left the author in terms of creative work and are now hovering in a publisher/editorial mode, either about to be released or having already been released. And that's a story. So this weirdly truncated or weirdly decapitated, who knows, this strange notion of a proper story really taints the whole conversation and creates all sorts of trouble. It's obviously based on that variable that I'm trying to focus on, which is performance, that what we're doing here is performance art. And if we throw that out, then we end up with, well, what is a story then? Because you can't just kick it on ourselves and make us the audience and say, well, it's performance for ourselves, and maintain all of the baggage, all the content, all the expectations, and all of the defining traits of a story of that kind. So all of that is just going to throw us into confusion. So by eliminating that, what are we left with? We are left with a useful analogy to music of musicians getting together in a non-performance context. If non-musicians are available or other people who aren't playing are there, they're considered to be auditory participants rather than audience in a separated receptive sense. And so you have getting together and doing this, and you also do have starting points. You do have notions of content, and you also have the awareness of interactive effects, which will then have effects on the material itself, so that the material itself will only exist as this produced moment. Whether it's recorded or not is irrelevant, and I'm not talking about motivations, I'm talking about definitions. In definitional terms, recording it is irrelevant. So, and say, oh, okay, see, we have it now that it's recorded, right? Let's leave that variable out. So with this in mind, what about role-playing? Cool, because you were talking about what we're here to do and whether the use of the word story is valuable in this, which is great. I feel like I've gone 50% of the way around the merry-go-rounds and I haven't fallen off, I hope. So good. With that in our sights, what then are we talking about in terms of what we're doing? Since we've thrown out the idea of making the salable, finished, packaged, and kind of now ready for the audience, let's sell it packaging, since we've thrown that out, we don't have to worry about that as what we're here to do in those terms. Instead, we can focus on it more of what we came to do in order to do, not in order to have. And I maintain that use of the word story, painful as it is, and requiring all of this sort of retooling of vocabulary that we seem to have to do, is valuable. Because when the musicians or whoever gets together, when we can analogize this to all kinds of social leisure activities now, because it is one thing in that regard. Unless they want to do it, they aren't going to. And if they want to do it and discover that one another can, which fuels that desire very strongly when you realize that you're in the company of people who are like-minded in this way, it's non-problematic. There is no need for spitting on your hands and shaking them and saying, okay, we're here to make this story. Okay, let's not fuck it up. It's, oh no, this is so difficult. We got to get in this mind state. How am I going to make this story? Oh no, it's up there in the mountaintop, just over the edge of the mountaintop, really hard to get up there, and maybe I can grab it in time. All that. You see, we have a wonderful, wonderful counter argument to that, which you have provided in your account of play. Nobody at that table playing Cthulhu Dark had to struggle with that desire, or to struggle with getting it into play, or to struggle with other people who might not get it or agree, or oh no. And nobody in your D&D 5th edition game is having any such difficulty whatsoever. Based on your account, it seems actually quite powerful. And that's what I'm talking about. Yes, the inclination has to be there. If the people weren't so inclined, they wouldn't be doing it. Given that they are so inclined, it is transparent, invisible, unquestioned, non-problematic to be doing it. And I really want to focus on that, this notion of aggravation, of risk. You see, it is kind of funny too, because there is a risk. You might not do very well at it. Okay, but this is what we came to do. And there's nothing else to be discussed. Easy. And I think that's why it's okay to say that we came to make a story as a descriptive phenomenon, or as a phenomenological thing. We look at it and say, that is what they're doing and what they came to do. But I'm not discussing that in a contractual, stressed, planned out, oh no, we have to, and will you all please get your shit together and do this? Or would you all please put aside all these other great things you could be doing and do this hard thing with me instead? All of those somehow have gotten wrapped up in the term of making a story, that you have to sort of switch into some difficulty, switch into some sort of task-based agony. And I'm talking about making a story in a very different fashion. Not, oh no, we have to do it, it's so hard, but rather, oh look. And that's about it. We do have to have the recognition that inclination matters, that purpose of activity together matters, that it won't happen. It might not happen too well if you're not that good at it today or something, but it won't happen without the inclination. So that leads me to my last point in this overly long reply. The last point being that oh, well, then I guess we can just get together with no talk of agenda whatsoever, no indication or interest in agenda whatsoever. Let's just have all agendas be kind of infinite and completely determined by this group. I mean, people will never separate technique from agenda anyway. Let's quit trying. Let's just let every group, bloom in its own little colorful way, and whatever agenda they pursue or purpose they pursue, and whatever set of techniques they use to do it, we'll all just get along better if we just call it all fun and, quit freaking chopping things up because that's mean or bad or something. I want to get away from that because it is a recipe for incoherence. Old forged words, right? Mean ones that make people upset. The idea that without any understanding of inclination, that you will mute your inclinations in order to get along, or you will accept that other inclinations that's at the table, you'll allow as how, well, that's just as good as any, so I'll just enjoy mine for myself. And everybody just kind of retreats into these thick-husked little separate entities. Because that's what happens when you say, well, forget purposes of play. We'll all just get together and we're gamers together, so it'll work out. And then, boy, you want to talk about rabbit holes there, then all kinds of things go funky places. But we don't have to really worry about that in this case because you're not having that experience. We don't have to worry about whether this is possible. How could this be possible? How can we make this possible? How can we talk about it as if it could be possible, so that not only do we convince people that it can be done, we also convince them that we are going to do this. It's a maddening Sisyphean task to think about it in those terms when we look at your table and we see that no such need to think of it in those terms is present. We have it. It's happening. Purpose of play. Story now. Why? We're inclined. Why? The system is facilitating this. It's a good system for it in these cases. You've messed with one, all sorts of things. You've worked on system at your table and it's happening. Enjoy. And yeah, we have inclination. And yeah, we have starting material content. And yeah, we have agency of messing, working with it, extending it, and going from point A to point B. And as I've talked about before, in that context, all the structural elements that we like to think of and their variations, those do happen because we're good at it as people. All right. Hope that helps. Take care.